Hello out there, everyone. Today we're going to take a look at this wonderful 2014 Severin Blu-ray release of Lost Soul, the doomed journey of Richard Stanley's Island of Dr. Moreau, which is one of the most fascinating documentaries about the making of this film, and in particular, the experience that Richard Stanley went through as the initial director, who had been given an opportunity to basically direct his, dream film. He was a big fan, Stanley was, of the original source material, and was elated when he discovered that he was going to be given the reins to this film. And once, though, he had the cast that was in place, which did go through quite a few moments of tumult, as they say, it eventually settled on a cast with Marlon Brando and Val Kilmer, and that in and of itself proved to be incredibly problematic from the young director's perspective. He was simply unable to marshal the strength to keep everything running and his actors, hitting their mark, so to speak. And I believe, based upon the documentary, he was only at the reins for about a week before he was eventually let go. And I do think it was partly also due to the fact that he was perhaps in over his head. Stanley had never made a big budget feature film prior to this. He was most notably known for Hardware, a low-budget post-apocalyptic sci-fi film from early 1990, which I think visually is arresting and has some interesting things to say, but I actually rewatched it recently and thought it was a little bit weak, to be honest. But that isn't to say that Stanley doesn't have talent. Far from it. I think he actually has a very singular voice, and even just listening to the interviews with him on this documentary, he's a fascinating guy, and one that I think would have been perfect for the source material if he had had perhaps a lesser known cast and was able to sort of make his art. Instead, he had to contend with incredibly narcissistic and insecure and immature egos in the form of Marlon Brando and Val Kilmer, which, by the way, I love both actors, so it pains me to hear about these stories about how badly behaved they were on this film, as well as other movies too. Apparently, Val really kind of blacklisted himself during the 90s, and obviously, he fell ill as well with his throat cancer. And, I think he's since sort of turned the corner, and he seems to be sufficiently repentant and has demonstrated a measure of humility about the whole thing. But, it's just sad because at that point, when they were filming this movie, he was basically on top of the world. I think he had just done Batman Forever and, had just an incredible amount of goodwill right there in his, at his disposal. And he just burnt those bridges to a crisp, especially on this film. Marlon Brando, of course, had been known for many, many years as being someone that was very irascible and obstreperous, and this film was no different. Just some of the anecdotes in this documentary are absolutely hysterical, while also being just sad, because I think, again, Stanley got sort of a raw deal ultimately from the experience. He, incidentally, Richard Stanley, that is, I believe, just did Color Out of Space from a couple years ago with Nick Cage, that sort of Lovecraftian cosmic horror film, which actually wasn't bad. I didn't think it was great, but I thought it was an interesting, an interesting attempt at creating something new. But in any case, this Severin release, I highly recommend it. The documentary itself, which was released in 2014, is fascinating by itself, but then there's also this great additional supplemental feature content, as per usual, with Severin, and this is the House of Pain edition, which is features also a audiobook of The Island of Dr. Moreau, which I'm listening to now, and it's narrated or read by Richard Stanley himself. And it's an interesting story. I've actually never read the source material, but I think it's just an interesting tale. And, you know, by the way, I actually still like the movie Island of Dr. Moreau. I remember seeing it in theaters and thinking, while it was weird and didn't entirely work, I thought that there was enough there to like, and it was just so peculiar that you had to marvel at the fact that that movie was released, because it was just so odd. And now, having seen the sort of backstory behind the film and the production, there's plenty of reasons for that. So I would definitely recommend this film. Obviously, this is in that genre of documentary of, you know, productions that have just gone sideways or were just hellacious. And I can think of another film, Burden of Dreams, by Les Blank, about the production of Fitzcarraldo, the Werner Herzog film. Then, of course, there's the Lost in La Mancha, the documentary about Terry Gilliam's failed attempt to bring Don Quixote to screen that first time. And then even more recently, the Jodorowsky's Dune documentary was an infinitely fascinating piece of cinema as well. So I actually enjoy the genre. I think that this is a very good representation of that, and I highly recommend it. And Severin has just done a bang-up job with this release. So on that note, please do take care out there, everyone. Stay safe, be kind, and by all means, keep watching good cinema.